Welcome. If you're here, it's time to set aside the urgencies of your day. Find a comfortable position, adjust your pillow, and let your breathing settle into its natural rhythm. Tonight, we're traveling back through centuries to a world both familiar and impossibly distant: ancient Rome, the sprawling heart of an empire that stretched across continents. But we won't be visiting marble forums or imperial palaces tonight. Instead, imagine yourself in the narrow, shadowed streets of the Suburra, Rome's crowded working district, where most Romans lived their lives far from the gleaming monuments. Here, the air carries the scent of baking bread, wood smoke, and the press of humanity. The rhythm of life moves to the steady pulse of labor, the turning of millstones, the crackling of ovens. We're going to explore the world of a baker epister, as the Romans called them. These were the people who fed the city, who rose before dawn and worked through the night, whose hands shaped the fundamental sustenance that kept Rome alive. Their lives were not dramatic or heroic in the traditional sense, but they were essential, woven into the very fabric of daily existence. Allow yourself to drift back with me now. Let the distance of 2,000 years create a gentle buffer between you and the present moment. We'll move slowly through this world, observing the textures and rhythms of a life utterly unlike your own, yet recognizable in its patterns of work, rest, and the simple struggle to endure. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. Imagine yourself waking in darkness. Not the soft, controlled darkness of a modern bedroom, but the thick, almost tangible darkness of a Roman night, broken only by the faint glow of embers from the oven in the room below. The air is cool against your skin, carrying the familiar scent of smoke and grain dust that has permeated the walls of this building for decades. You are a baker in Rome, in the reign of Emperor Trajan, around 110 CE. Your small apartment sits above your bakery or pistrina in a 6-story tenement building called an insula. The building groans and settles around you, a living structure of wood and brick housing perhaps 200 souls. Through the thin walls, you can hear the breathing of your neighbor, the cry of an infant 3 rooms away, the shuffle of someone else already awake and beginning their day. Your bed is a simple frame with rope netting, covered by a thin woolen blanket. The mattress beneath you is stuffed with straw, compressed by years of use. As you sit up, your joints voice their familiar complaints. You've been working in this bakery for 23 years, since you were purchased at age 12 by the previous owner. You earned your freedom 7 years ago, but freedom has meant only the right to continue the same work under your own name, with all its attendant risks and debts. The room around you measures perhaps 10 feet by 12. Against one wall stands a small wooden chest containing your 2 spare tunics, a cloak for winter, and the bronze bowl you use for washing. A tiny clay oil lamp sits on a shelf, its reservoir nearly empty. You light it from the embers you keep burning in a small brazier, and the flame pushes back the darkness just enough to dress. Your tunic is the same one you wore yesterday and the day before. It's made of undyed wool, scratchy against your skin, stained with flour and ash in patterns that have become permanent. You tie it with a rope belt, well worn and fraying at the ends. No toga for you. Such garments are for citizens with leisure and social standing. You are free, yes, but you are bound by your labor, and your clothing reflects this reality. You descend the narrow wooden stairs to the bakery below. Each step creaks under your weight, and you navigate them in near darkness, knowing their placement by long habit. The bakery occupies the ground floor of your insula, opening directly onto the street through wide shutters that will remain closed for another few hours. The space is perhaps 30 feet deep and 20 feet wide, divided into work areas that have been organized and reorganized countless times over the years. Near the street-facing wall are wooden shelves where you'll eventually display the day's loads. Behind that is your kneading area, a long war wooden table scarred by decades of use. And dominating the back half of the room is your oven, a massive brick structure that occupies nearly a quarter of the floor space. The oven is still warm from yesterday's baking. You've learned to bank the fires carefully each night, preserving enough heat to make the morning's work easier. Now you crouch before it, your knees protesting, and begin feeding it small pieces of wood. The wood is expensive. You purchase it from dealers who bring it in carts from forests outside the city. Every piece must be used efficiently. Nothing can be wasted. As the fire builds, you turn your attention to the grain. In storage rooms behind the bakery, you keep sacks of wheat purchased from the massive warehouses near the Tiber, where grain ships from Egypt and North Africa are unloaded with mechanical efficiency. This grain is the foundation of everything. Without it, you have no business, no income, no life. You move to the mill, the defining feature of any Roman bakery. It consists of two parts: a lower conical stone called the meta, fixed permanently to the floor, and an upper hourglass-shaped stone called the catalyst that rotates around it. The mechanism is deceptively simple, yet it requires constant attention and considerable strength to operate. Your donkey, housed in a small stable area adjacent to the bakery, is already awake. You can hear it shifting its weight, perhaps anticipating the work ahead. You lead the animal to the mill and attach it to the wooden beam that extends from the catalyst. The donkey knows this routine as well as you do. It has performed this same circuit for 6 years now, walking in an endless circle, turning the upper millstone against the lower. You pour wheat into the opening at the top of the catalyst. As the donkey walks, the grain is crushed between the stones, falling as flour into a circular trough you've built around the mill's base. The sound is constant, a grinding, rhythmic scraping that will continue for hours. It becomes the background of your existence, a sound you hear even in sleep, a rhythm your body knows in its bones. The donkey walks. You guide it with occasional verbal commands, though mostly it requires no direction. The animal's life is perhaps even more constrained than yours. It knows only this circle, this perpetual rotation, this endless crushing of grain into powder. You feed it, you water it, you clean its small stable, but you do not consider it a companion. It is a tool, as essential as the millstone itself, and like all tools, it will eventually wear out and need replacement. As the flour collects, you periodically sweep it from the trough into large clay vessels. The texture tells you much. You can feel the quality of the grind between your fingers, sensing whether the stones need adjustment. Too coarse, and the bread will be gritty, unmarketable to anyone but the poorest customers. Too fine, and you've wasted time and the donkey's energy. By the time the first gray light begins to seep through the cracks in your shutters, you have enough flour for the day's first batch of bread. You carry the vessels to your kneading table and begin the process that will occupy the next several hours. Water comes from the public fountain 2 streets away. You filled your large clay storage jars yesterday evening, but now you must add more. You take 2 smaller amphorae and walk through streets just beginning to stir with life. A few other bakers are already at work. You can smell their ovens, see the glow of firelight through doorways. A man empties a chamber pot from a 3rd-story window, and you step aside to avoid the splash, barely noting the action. This is simply how the city functions. The fountain, when you reach it, is quiet. Later, it will be crowded with servants and slaves collecting water for their households. But now, you have it to yourself. The water flows from a lead pipe into a stone basin, cool and clear. You fill your vessels, hoist them with practiced efficiency, and return to your bakery, your shoulders bearing the weight without complaint. Mixing the dough requires judgment developed over years. The water must be the right temperature. You've learned to sense this with your wrist, much as you imagine a mother tests milk for her infant. Too cold, and the yeast will work slowly. Too warm, and the dough will develop improperly. You add salt, precious and expensive, measured carefully from a small container you keep locked away. Salt must be purchased from dealers who bring it from the coastal evaporation bands, and its cost affects your profit margins significantly. The yeast comes from yesterday's dough. You always reserve a portion to start the next day's batch. This is knowledge passed down through generations of bakers, a living continuity that connects you to pistons from centuries past. The sourdough starter in your possession was given to you by your former owner, who received it from his predecessor, and so on back through time. You mix flour, water, salt, and starter in a large wooden trough. Then the kneading begins. Your hands press into the mass, folding, pressing, turning. The motion is rhythmic, almost meditative. Press, fold, turn. Press, fold, turn. Your forearms burn with the effort, but this is familiar pain, expected pain. The dough gradually transforms under your hands, becoming elastic and smooth, developing the structure that will trap the gases produced by fermentation. The work is solitary. You have no assistants, no apprentices. You cannot afford to pay another person, and you have no family to press into service. Your wife died in childbirth 11 years ago, and the child died with her. You have not remarried. The economics of your situation do not support a family. Every bronze coin you earn must be carefully allocated for rent, for grain, for the occasional repair to your oven or millstone. Once the dough is kneaded, you divide it into portions. Each portion becomes a single loaf, shaped with quick, efficient movements. Your hands know the correct weight by feel approximately 1 Roman pound, or just under 12 ounces. Too large, and the loaf won't bake properly. Too small, and customers will complain about the value. You shape each portion into a round form, scoring the top with a knife in a simple cross pattern. This isn't decoration. It controls how the loaf expands during baking, preventing it from splitting unpredictably. You place the shaped loaves on wooden boards dusted with flour, covering them with damp cloth to prevent the surface from drying as they rise. Now comes waiting. The dough must ferment, the yeast consuming sugars and producing the gas that will make the bread light and digestible. This takes time, several hours, depending on the ambient temperature. You cannot rush it. You cannot will it to happen faster. You can only wait and attend to other tasks. You clean the kneading table, scraping away dried dough and wiping the surface with a damp cloth. You sweep the floor, gathering flour dust and debris into a pile near the door. Nothing is wasted even. This sweeping will be collected and eventually sold as animal feed. You check the fire in your oven, adding wood to maintain the heat. You inspect the shelves where you'll display the finished loaves, brushing away accumulated dust. Outside, the city is waking fully now. You can hear the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestones. The only time wheeled traffic is permitted in Rome's center is during the night and early morning hours, and drivers rush to complete their deliveries before the prohibition takes effect. You hear voices, the bark of a dog, the cry of a street vendor already hawking something, perhaps vegetables from the countryside, perhaps fish brought from Ostia's markets. The light through your shutters grows stronger. You estimate the time by the angle of the sun, by the progression of sounds from the street, by the internal clock developed over decades of rising before dawn. You check the dough, pressing it gently with a finger to test its readiness. Not yet. It needs more time. When the dough has risen sufficiently, you can see it's increased in volume, can feel the slight resistance and spring when you touch it. You prepare the oven. The fire must be very hot now, hot enough that you cannot hold your hand inside the opening for more than a second or two. You use a long-handled tool to rake the burning coals to the sides of the oven, creating a clear space in the center. The oven's domed interior glows with heat, the bricks radiating warmth that makes sweat spring out across your forehead and back. This is summer, and the bakery becomes almost unbearable during baking, but you have no choice. The bread must be made. Using a wooden peel, a long paddle, you transfer the loaves from their boards into the oven. The motion requires precision and speed. Too slow, and the peel becomes too hot to hold. Too careless, and a loaf might fall into the coals, ruined. You slide each loaf into position with practiced efficiency, arranging them so they have room to expand without touching. Then you close the oven door, a thick wooden panel you've soaked in water to prevent it from igniting, and you wait again. The baking takes time, perhaps 45 minutes for loaves of this size. You cannot see inside, cannot check their progress. You must rely on experience, on the subtle changes in smell, on your knowledge of this particular oven's temperament. While the bread bakes, you prepare for the next batch. More flour must be ground, which means more circuits for the donkey. More dough must be mixed and kneaded. The work is cyclical, repeating in patterns that govern your entire day. You are not making bread. You are maintaining a continuous process that began before you were born and will continue after you die. When you finally open the oven door, the heat rushes out in a wave that forces you to step back. The loaves have risen and browned, their crusts crisp and golden. Using the peel, you extract them one by one, setting them on your wooden shelves to cool. The smell is rich and comforting, though you barely notice it anymore. It is simply the smell of your life. You open the shutters fully now, letting light and air into the bakery. The street outside is busy. This is the Subura, one of Rome's most densely populated districts, and the morning market is in full swing. People pass constantly, many of them potential customers. Your bread sells for 2 asses per loaf, a price set by tradition and competition rather than by any calculation of costs and profits. A skilled laborer might earn 4 or 5 denarii per day, with 16 asses to the denarius. Your bread represents a significant portion of a working person's daily expenses, but it is essential. Romans eat bread with every meal. It is the foundation of their diet, often their primary source of calories. Customers arrive throughout the morning. Some are slaves sent by their owners to purchase bread for the household. Some are working people like yourself, buying a single loaf to sustain them through the day. Some are resellers, tavern keepers, or street food vendors who will use your bread in their own businesses. You exchange few words. 1 loaf, you hand it over. They place 2 bronze coins in your palm. The transaction is complete. There is no conversation about the weather, no discussion of news, no personal connection. You are a baker. They need bread. This is the extent of the relationship. Some customers try to negotiate, claiming the loaves are smaller than yesterday, asserting that another bakery sells for less. You do not engage with these complaints. Your price is your price. If they don't want to pay it, they can go elsewhere. Rome has hundreds of bakeries. Competition is fierce and constant. By midday, your first batch is sold. You've earned perhaps 32 asses 2 denarii, but your costs are mounting. You owe rent to the landlord who owns your insula 8 denarii per month, due in 2 days. You need to purchase more grain a sack, costs 3 denarii, and lasts perhaps 4 days. The wood for your oven costs another denarius per week. The donkey needs feeding hay and grain that you must purchase. Salt, oil for your lamp, repairs to equipment, taxes to the city authorities. The expenses accumulate with remorseless consistency. The pattern repeats through the afternoon. More grinding, more mixing, more kneading, more baking. Your hands ache. Your back protests. The heat from the oven has made the bakery almost intolerable, and you strip down to just your tunic, soaked with sweat. Other bakers on your street are doing the same work. You can see them through their open shutters, mirror images of yourself, caught in the same cycle. There is no camaraderie between you. They are competitors, each trying to attract the same customers, each operating on the same thin margins. If one of them fails, you might gain some of their business. If you fail, they will gain yours. This is simply how commerce works. A customer complains that a loaf he purchased this morning was undercooked in the center. He demands a refund or a replacement. You examine the loaf he's brought back. It appears fine to you, the center thoroughly baked. But arguing will gain you nothing. You give him a fresh loaf. He leaves without thanks. You've lost the profit on 2 loaves now, but you've maintained the fragile reputation that keeps customers returning. Late afternoon brings a different type of customer, the very poor, the desperate. They ask for bread that is a day old, which you sell at reduced price. They ask if you have any scraps or broken pieces, which they can afford. You do have some loaves that cracked badly during baking, pieces that fell into the ash and became unsaleable to your regular customers. You sell these for an as or less. The profit is minimal, but the alternative is waste, and you cannot afford waste. One customer, a woman you recognize from the neighborhood, tries to negotiate credit. Her husband has been ill, unable to work. They have children. She will pay you next week when he returns to his job. You know this story. You've heard variations of it hundreds of times. You tell her no. You cannot extend credit. You barely have enough to meet your own obligations. If you start giving bread on promises of future payment, you will be ruined within a month. She doesn't argue. She simply nods and walks away. Perhaps she'll find another baker more sympathetic, or perhaps her family will go hungry tonight. You do not allow yourself to think about it. Compassion is a luxury you cannot afford. The economics of survival are too unforgiving. As the sun begins its descent toward the western hills, you prepare your final batch of the day. Your body moves on pure habit now. The kneading, the shaping, the loading of the oven, all of it happens without conscious thought. You are a machine built for this purpose, optimized over years to perform these specific motions with maximum efficiency. The last loaves are baking as the street outside transitions from day commerce to evening activities. The taverns along your street are filling with men finished with their day's labor. You can hear conversation, occasional laughter, the clatter of dice on wooden tables. You will not join them. You cannot spare the money for wine, and even if you could, you lack the time. There is still work to be done. When the final batch comes out of the oven, you make your own meal. You take a loaf, not a perfect one, but one with a slight irregularity that makes it less saleable, and break it open. The interior is soft, steaming slightly, the texture exactly as it should be. You dip it in sheep olive oil, sprinkle it with salt, and eat standing near your work table. This is your dinner. Bread, oil, salt. Perhaps once a week you supplement it with porridge made from barley or beans, or on very rare occasions, a small amount of cheese or dried fish. But mostly it's bread. You make bread, you sell bread, you eat bread. The circle is complete. After eating, you begin the cleanup that will prepare the bakery for tomorrow. You bank the oven fire, preserving coals that will still be warm when you wake before dawn. You sweep the floor again, collecting the day's accumulation of flour and ash. You wash your mixing trough and kneading table, though the washing is cursory, a rinse with water, a quick scrape. True cleanliness is impossible in this environment. You feed and water the donkey, mucking out its small stable area. The animal will rest tonight, but tomorrow it will resume its eternal circuit around the millstone. You wonder sometimes how long it will last. Donkeys are expensive, and when this one finally wears out, finding the money to replace it will be a crisis. Before ascending to your small room for the night, you perform a ritual that brings both comfort and anxiety. You count your day's earnings. The bronze coins are worn smooth by countless hands, their images barely visible. You have taken in perhaps 64 asses today for denarii. From this you must mentally subtract your expenses. Grain for tomorrow will cost 3/4 of a denarius. Wood for the oven will cost another 1/4 denarius if you purchase a small quantity. Rent is due soon 8 denarii that you've been slowly accumulating. You have 5 denarii saved. You need 3 more in the next 2 days. It's possible, but only if nothing goes wrong. If a batch of dough fails, if the oven develops a crack, if you fall ill even for a single day, the entire precarious structure collapses. You try not to think about what would happen if you couldn't pay the rent. Eviction would mean losing not just your home, but your business. The oven, the millstone, the shelving, all of it belongs to the landlord, part of the property you rent. Without them, you couldn't work. Without work, you couldn't eat. The chain of consequences leads to only one place, and you've seen what happens to people who end up there begging on street corners, living in the most desperate poverty, or simply disappearing, their fate unrecorded and unmourned. You climb the stairs to your room as the city settles into its nocturnal rhythms. The sounds change, less commercial traffic, more residential noises. Through your thin walls, you hear a couple arguing, their voices rising and falling in a familiar pattern. You hear someone coughing, a harsh, wet sound that speaks of illness or chronic lung damage from breathing the city's smoke-filled air. You remove your tunic and lie down on your bed. Your body aches in specific places, your lower back, your shoulders, your knees. These pains are constant companions. You have no remedies for them, no treatments. They are simply the cost of your labor, accepted as inevitable. Sleep comes quickly, despite the discomfort. Your body knows it has only a few hours before the cycle begins again. There is no time for lying awake, contemplating your situation, or wondering about alternatives. Sleep is precious, efficient, necessary. Your body takes it when it can. In dreams, when you dream at all, you sometimes find yourself in strange situations. Walking through streets you've never seen. Speaking with people who exist nowhere but in your sleeping mind. But often your dreams are simply extensions of your waking life. You knead dough that never becomes workable. You tend an oven that won't maintain temperature. You count coins that slip through your fingers. Even in sleep, you cannot entirely escape the bakery. This day, this very specific day we've observed, is not unusual. It is not particularly difficult, nor particularly easy. It is simply a day, one in an uncountable succession of days that have come before and will come after. Tomorrow, you will wake before dawn. You will descend to your bakery. You will grind grain, mix dough, tend your oven, sell bread, count your earnings, and sleep briefly before beginning again. There are no holidays in your work. Religious festivals might mean the city's administrative offices close, but people still need bread. Perhaps you bake slightly less on festival days, or perhaps you bake more because people want bread for special meals. Either way, you work. The oven cannot be allowed to go cold for long reheating it, for nothing wastes too much wood. The cycle must continue. Years pass in this rhythm. You measure time not in grand historical events, but in the accumulation of small changes. The landlord raises your rent. Grain prices fluctuate with the harvest in Egypt. Your donkey ages and must be replaced, requiring you to borrow money from a lender at interest rates that will take months to repay. A new bakery opens 2 streets away, increasing competition. An old bakery closes when its owner dies without heirs, briefly decreasing competition. You are getting older. Your joints protest more loudly each morning. Your eyesight, never particularly sharp, seems to be declining. How much longer can you maintain this pace? What happens when your body finally gives out, when you can no longer perform the physical labor that sustains you? You have no savings beyond what's needed for immediate expenses. You have no family to care for you. The city provides no safety net for worn-out laborers. These thoughts visit you sometimes in the quiet moments, but you cannot dwell on them. There is always another batch of dough to knead, another oven to tend, another day to survive. The present moment demands all your attention and energy. The future must take care of itself, or not. You have no capacity to influence it. Though you work in solitude, you are part of a vast, invisible network that sustains Rome. The grain you use was grown in Egypt, harvested by agricultural workers, whose lives you will never know. It was transported across the Mediterranean by sailors who faced storms and pirates and the constant risk of shipwreck. It was unloaded at Ostia by dock workers whose labor was brutally hard and often short-lived. It was brought up the Tiber to Rome's warehouses by barge operators. It was stored and distributed by a complex system of merchants, administrators, and warehouse keepers. The wood that fuels your oven was cut by foresters working in the hills surrounding Rome. It was transported by cart drivers who navigated rough roads and steep grades. The salt you use was produced by workers at coastal evaporation pans, standing in the sun for endless hours. The bronze coins your customers pay you were minted in government workshops, stamped by workers performing the same repetitive motion thousands of times per day. All of this vast machinery of empire exists to accomplish one simple goal: feeding the city. And you, in your small bakery in the Subura, are a tiny but essential gear in this enormous mechanism. If you stop baking, a few dozen people will need to find another source of bread. If all the bakers stop, the city ceases to function. Riots would follow within days. The government knows this, which is why Rome's grain supply is a matter of state concern, carefully monitored and subsidized. You are not important as an individual. Your life is precarious, your existence marginal, but your function is vital. This paradox defines your entire reality. The bread you bake each day in your small bakery in the Subura exists because of a system so vast and complex that no single mind could fully comprehend it. Let us step back from your individual labor for a time and consider the network that makes your work possible: the Annona, Rome's grain supply system, and the millions of lives it touches across the empire. Under Emperor Trajan's rule, Rome houses perhaps 1 million inhabitants, crowded into a space of barely 13 square miles. These people cannot feed themselves. The city is too large, too densely packed, too divorced from agricultural land. Every day, they require grain hundreds of thousands of bushels that must come from somewhere else, transported across vast distances, distributed through channels both official and commercial. The Annona began as an emergency measure during the Republic, a response to periodic food shortages that threatened civil disorder. By the time of Augustus, it had transformed into something permanent, a feature of imperial governance as essential as the army or the tax system. The emperor personally guaranteed grain distribution to approximately 200,000 Roman citizens, providing free monthly rations that prevented starvation and, not incidentally, maintained political stability. You are not among those who receive the grain dole. As a former slave who earned manumission, you possess freedom, but not full citizenship status. The Annona serves citizen households, primarily male heads of families who meet specific criteria regarding income and property. Lists of eligible recipients are compiled by local officials, updated periodically, verified through bureaucratic processes you will never witness. Those excluded from the dole, people like yourself, must purchase grain at market prices, subject to speculation and manipulation by merchants who understand that hunger creates opportunity. When harvests fail in Egypt or North Africa, when ships are lost to storms, when political instability disrupts supply chains, grain prices spike dramatically. You have lived through several such crises, watching your profit margins evaporate as the cost of wheat doubled or tripled, while your bread prices remained constrained by what customers could pay. The wheat you ground this morning began its journey to your bakery months ago, perhaps in the Nile Delta, where Egyptian farmers worked fields that had produced grain for millennia. The land there floods predictably each year, depositing nutrient-rich silt that makes Egypt the breadbasket of the empire. Farmers plant wheat in autumn, after the floodwaters recede, and harvest it in spring. These Egyptian cultivators are not free farmers working their own land. Most are tenant farmers bound to estates owned by wealthy Romans or by the emperor himself. They work under contracts that obligate them to deliver specified quantities of grain to collection points, regardless of their own needs. If the harvest falls short, they must still meet their quotas, often going hungry themselves to satisfy distant masters they will never see. From collection points throughout the Nile Valley, grain travels by boat down the river to Alexandria, the great port city that serves as Egypt's connection to the wider Mediterranean world. Here it is transferred to massive grain ships, some capable of carrying 1,000 tons or more. These vessels are technological marvels, the largest ships afloat in the Ramang world, purpose-built for the grain trade. The voyage from Alexandria to Ostia, Rome's port at the mouth of the Tiber, typically takes 2 weeks if winds are favorable. But winds are not always favorable. Sailors must navigate the unpredictable Mediterranean, avoiding storms that can sink even the largest vessels. Pirates still operate in some regions, despite Rome's naval patrols. Every year, ships disappear lost with all hands and all cargo, their fate sometimes unknown for months until they simply fail to arrive. At Ostia, the grain is unloaded by dock workers, whose labor is brutal and often brief. They carry sacks weighing over 100 pounds from ship to warehouse, climbing narrow gangplanks, working in all weather. Many develop chronic injuries, herniated backs, damaged knees, shoulders, worn to uselessness by constant strain. When they can no longer work, they are replaced by younger men desperate for employment. From Ostia, the grain travels up the Tiber by barge to Rome's warehouses near the river. Here it enters the imperial distribution system or the commercial market, depending on its designation. Warehouse keepers maintain inventories. Clerks record transactions. Officials verify quantities and quality. This bureaucracy employs hundreds of people, all of them serving the singular purpose of ensuring that Rome continues to eat. The price of stability. The emperor understands what you understand instinctively, that hunger leads to disorder, and disorder threatens power. The annona is not charity. It is statcraft, a calculated investment in political stability. By guaranteeing basic sustenance to citizens, the emperor purchases their acquiescence, their gratitude, their willingness to accept his rule. When grain supplies run short, when distribution falters, when prices spike beyond what ordinary people can afford, riots follow. You have witnessed one such riot years ago. A rumor spread that grain ships had been diverted to another city, that the imperial warehouses were being hoarded for sale at inflated prices. Within hours, crowds gathered near the distribution points. The mood shifted from anxious to angry to violent. Shops were looted. Officials were attacked. The city's urban cohorts, Rome's police force, struggled to restore order. The riot ended only when the emperor himself appeared, promising that grain supplies were secure, that distributions would continue, that prices would be controlled. Whether these promises were entirely truthful mattered less than the reassurance they provided. The crowd dispersed. Commerce resumed. The crisis passed. You remember the riot not because of its drama, but because of its impact on your business. For 3 days, the streets were too dangerous for normal commerce. You baked bread, but few customers came to buy it. The loaves grew stale. You lost income you could not afford to lose. When order returned, you needed weeks to recover financially from those 3 lost days. This is why the annona matters, even to those like yourself who receive no direct benefit from it. The system maintains the stability that allows commerce to function. Without it, the city would descend into chaos that would destroy your livelihood as surely as fire or plague. 200 years after your time, though you cannot know this, the city of Pompeii will be buried by volcanic eruption, preserving in ash and pumice a snapshot of Roman life that includes bakeries remarkably similar to yours. Archaeologists in future centuries will excavate these bakeries with careful attention, documenting their layout, their equipment, their products. In one bakery, they will find carbonized loaves of bread panis quadratus, still sitting in the oven where they were baking when catastrophe struck. These loaves are round, scored into 8 sections with linear marks made before baking, identical in form to the bread you produce daily. The continuity across time and space is remarkable. Bakers in Pompeii use the same techniques, the same equipment, the same methods as you do in Rome. The excavations will reveal mills identical to yours basalt lava stones, consisting of a conical maida and an hourglass-shaped catalyst, turned by donkeys or occasionally by slaves. They will find kneading areas, storage rooms for grain, ovens of similar construction. In one particularly well-preserved bakery, they will even discover an industrial kneading machine, a labor-saving device consisting of paddles that mix dough mechanically, requiring only that a worker turn a handle. But they will also find something more disturbing evidence of conditions that speak to the darker realities of Roman labor. In what archaeologists will call a prison bakery, they will discover spaces where enslaved workers and donkeys were confined together, unable to leave, forced to grind grain in perpetual cycles. The rooms have no windows, no external access. The workers lived and died in darkness, their entire existence consumed by the turning of millstones. You employ no slaves in your bakery. You cannot afford them. But you know of such establishments. They exist throughout Rome, larger operations where owners maximize profit by minimizing costs, treating human workers as they treat their animals as tools to be used until they break. The work you do is slowly destroying your body. Though you lack the medical knowledge, understand the specific mechanisms. Future physicians will recognize that bakers face particular health hazards. The constant inhalation of flour dust damages lungs, causing a condition they will call baker's asthma, with prevalence rates around 10% among bakery workers. Even in Roman times, the hazard is recognized. Slaves who work in mills and bakeries are sometimes required to wear masks and gloves when handling flour, though this protection is rarely extended to free workers like yourself. The theory is that the flour particles damage the respiratory passages, creating chronic inflammation and difficulty breathing. The reality, as you experience it, is a persistent cough that has worsened over the years, occasional shortness of breath, a tightness in your chest that never entirely goes away. The heat from your oven affects you as well. Years of working in high temperatures have given you a tolerance that would seem remarkable to someone unaccustomed to such conditions, but tolerance is not the same as immunity. Your skin has been burned countless times, small accidents, momentary carelessness, the inevitable contact with hot surfaces in a confined space. Most of these burns healed, leaving faint scars. A few became infected, causing days of pain and concern before eventually resolving. Your hands tell the story of your profession. The joints are enlarged from years of kneading dough. The skin is thick and calloused, permanently stained by flour and ash. You have lost sensation in parts of your fingers, nerve damage from repetitive motion and occasional burns. When you grasp objects, your grip is sometimes uncertain. This worries you, though you do not speak of it. If your hands fail completely, you cannot work. And if you cannot work, you cannot survive. Your back troubles you constantly. The bending, the lifting, the hours spent in positions that strain the spine, all of it accumulates into chronic pain that never fully subsides. You have learned to move in ways that minimize discomfort, but these compensatory movements create their own problems, stressing other parts of your body. Your knees ache, your shoulders burn. Sleep provides only partial relief. There are no treatments available to you. Physicians exist in Rome, but they serve the wealthy. A working baker cannot afford their fees, cannot spare the time for consultations and therapies. You manage your pain with the only tools available: endurance, and the knowledge that stopping would be worse than continuing. Your small bakery connects to systems and people spanning the entire Mediterranean world. The Egyptian farmer who grew your wheat is part of your life, though you will never meet him, never know his name, never be aware of his existence. The sailor who transported the grain across dangerous seas contributed to your survival, though he knows nothing of you. The warehouse keeper in Rome who sold you the grain, the wood merchant who supplies your fuel, the customer who purchases your bread, all of these people are linked in chains of mutual dependency that sustain the empire's existence. This network is fragile in ways that are not always apparent. A drought in Egypt reverberates through every bakery in Rome. A naval defeat that allows pirates to disrupt shipping affects the price you pay for grain months later. Political instability in North Africa creates shortages that force you to reduce production or raise prices, alienating customers who might not return. The empire has created mechanisms to buffer against these vulnerabilities. The Annona stockpiles grain reserves against shortages. Multiple provinces supply wheat, so that failure in one region need not create catastrophe in Rome. Shipping is organized with military precision, with schedules and quotas and penalties for failure to deliver. The entire system is designed to be robust, resilient, capable of withstanding disruptions. But ultimately, it all depends on the continuation of specific conditions, that Egypt remains peaceful and productive, that the seas remain navigable, that the political will to maintain the Annona persists, that the complex machinery of imperial administration continues to function. You sense, without quite articulating it, that all of this could fail, that the grain might stop coming, that the bakeries might fall silent, that the city might starve. These are not thoughts you can afford to dwell upon. They lead nowhere useful. Your focus must remain on the immediate, the tangible, the tasks that fill your days. But sometimes, in the brief moments between sleep and waking, you feel the precariousness of it all your life. The city, the empire itself, all balanced on foundations more delicate than they appear. Trajan, the emperor under whose rule you live, understands grain in ways his predecessors might not have. He has expanded the Annona, increased distributions, improved the infrastructure of supply. He sees the grain dole not merely as necessity, but as opportunity, a way to demonstrate his competence, his connection to divine favor, his legitimacy as ruler. When Trajan inaugurates new warehouse facilities or visits the distribution points, he is not simply inspecting infrastructure. He is performing rulership, demonstrating to the population that their welfare matters to him, that he personally ensures their survival. The message is clear. The emperor provides. The emperor protects. The emperor deserves loyalty and obedience in return for bread. You will never see the emperor. He exists in a realm completely separate from yours, moving through palaces and forums, making decisions that affect millions, living a life of luxury you cannot imagine. But his policies shape your reality nonetheless. The grain you purchase has been brought to Rome by systems he maintains. The relative stability that allows your business to function results from his governance. Even the customers who buy your bread and do so partly because the Annona prevents total destitution among Rome's poor. You owe the emperor nothing directly, no taxes on your small business, no service, no personal obligation. Yet you are bound to him as surely as if chains connected you, bound by the invisible ties of economic interdependence and imperial administration. He does not know you exist, but you exist in part because of structures he maintains. Let us turn now from the mechanics of grain supply to something more intangible, the way bread and fire interweave with belief, with ritual, with the spiritual dimensions of Roman life. Your work as a baker connects you to sacred traditions older than the empire itself, though you may not always think of it in such terms. Every morning when you coax your oven's banked coals back to flame, you participate in an act that mirrors one of Rome's most ancient and sacred rituals. In the Forum, not far from your neighborhood in the Subura, stands the Temple of Vesta, a circular structure housing an eternal flame tended by 6 virgin priestesses. This flame must never be extinguished, for it represents the vitality of Rome itself, the divine protection that ensures the city's continuation. Vesta is the goddess of the hearth, the home, the domestic fire that provides warmth and makes bread possible. She is not a dramatic deity who hurls thunderbolts or wages wars. Her domain is quieter, more fundamental, the flame that cooks food, that transforms raw grain into sustenance, that keeps households alive through winter's darkness. Every Roman home maintains its own hearth fire, ideally kept burning continuously, and every such fire is sacred to Vesta. The Vestal virgins who tend the eternal flame in the Forum perform duties remarkably similar to some of your own work. They prepare sacred bread mola salsa, a salted flour mixture used in religious ceremonies throughout the year. On June 15th, they ceremonially sweep the temple, removing the accumulated debris of the year. These rituals connect the highest religious offices in Rome to the most basic domestic activities: sweeping, baking, maintaining fire. You have never entered the Temple of Vesta. It is not a place for people like you, but you know of it, and on some level, you understand that your daily work with fire and grain echoes what happens in that sacred space. The difference is one of scale and social importance, not of fundamental activity. Once each year, on the 9th of June, Rome celebrates the Vestalia, a festival honoring Vesta. For most Romans, this is a day when the temple opens to women who walk barefoot into its interior to make offerings and prayers for their households. But for bakers specifically, the Vestalia holds particular significance, for it is also the day when your profession honors the goddess whose fire makes your work possible. On this day, the one day of the year when your oven might legitimately remain cold, you join other bakers in processions through the city. The millstones in bakeries throughout Rome are garlanded with flowers and loaves of bread. Even the donkeys that turn the mills are decorated, their usual burdens temporarily lifted, their role in the sacred work of bread-making acknowledged. You have participated in this festival for years, though always with mixed feelings. The ritual requires closing your bakery, which means lost income you can rarely afford. But tradition demands it, and to work on the Vestalia would invite the disapproval of neighbors and customers. So you decorate your millstone with whatever flowers you can afford, perhaps bake a small special loaf to offer at a neighborhood shrine, and spend the day in reluctant idleness. The festival commemorates an ancient legend. Centuries ago, when Rome was besieged by Gauls, the city's defenders found themselves running low on supplies, including flour for bread. In desperation, they prayed to Jupiter and to Ceres, goddess of grain. With the last of their flour, they baked small loaves and hurled them over the walls at the besieging army. The Gauls, seeing this apparent abundance, believed Rome could withstand a prolonged siege and withdrew their forces. In gratitude, the Romans built a temple to Jupiter, Pister Jupiter the baker, linking divine favor directly to your profession. Whether this story is historically accurate matters less than what it represents. Acknowledgement that bread is not merely food, but a symbol of survival, of civilization, of the city's very existence. Your daily labor, grinding grain and baking loaves, connects to this deeper meaning. You feed Rome. Without bakers, the city cannot endure. Beyond the formal festivals, bread weaves through Roman religious life in countless smaller ways. Families make offerings of bread at household shrines dedicated to the Lares and Penates, the protective spirits of the home. When someone dies, bread is placed in tombs to nourish them in the afterlife. During weddings, bride and groom share bread as part of the ceremony, symbolizing their union and shared life ahead. You occasionally receive requests for special breads for these purposes. A customer might ask for a particularly well-formed loaf for a wedding ceremony, or small loaves to place in a tomb. You charge the same price bread as bread, regardless of its intended use, but you take perhaps slightly more care with these orders, sensing that they carry significance beyond mere sustenance. The religious dimension of bread extends to beliefs about proper treatment. Some Romans consider it unlucky to cut bread with a knife, preferring to break it by hand. Others believe that bread dropped on the floor must be picked up and kissed before being discarded, as a sign of respect for Ceres, who provided the grain. You do not necessarily hold these beliefs yourself, but you observe their presence in Roman culture, the way bread transcends its material nature to become something symbolic. There is something mysterious in the process you perform each day, though familiarity has dulled your awareness of it. You take grain hard, inedible seeds, and through grinding reduce them to powder. You mix this powder with water and salt, creating a sticky, unpromising mass. You add the starter, that mysterious substance that bubbles and froths with invisible life. You knead the dough, and it transforms under your hands, becoming elastic and smooth. Then you wait, and something happens that you cannot see. The dough rises, swelling with gas produced by forces you do not understand. You bake it in fire, and it transforms again, the pale dough becoming golden bread, its texture changing from dense and sticky to light and firm. The process seems almost magical, this multiple transformation of substance into fundamentally different substance. Ancient peoples recognized this mystery and connected it to divine forces. The grain comes from Ceres, goddess of agriculture. The fire comes from Vesta, the transformation itself, the rising, the baking, the creation of something nourishing from raw materials, represents a kind of miracle, a cooperation between human labor and divine favor. You do not think in these terms consciously as you work. Your concerns are practical, maintaining the correct oven temperature, kneading until the dough reaches proper consistency, timing the fermentation appropriately. But perhaps somewhere in your understanding, there remains an echo of this older recognition, this sense that bread making involves forces beyond simple mechanical processes. In the future, when Pompeii's buried bakeries are excavated, archaeologists will find evidence of these spiritual dimensions alongside the practical equipment. Shrines to household deities will be discovered in bakery courtyards. Protective symbols will be found inscribed on oven walls. The material remains will testify that even commercial bakeries businesses focused on profit-maintained connections to the sacred. They will find bread itself, carbonized but recognizable, preserved by the volcanic ash that destroyed the city. These loaves, chemically analyzed, will reveal their composition: wheat flour, water, salt, perhaps traces of the sourdough culture that leavened them. But they cannot capture the prayers that might have accompanied their making, the rituals that surrounded their consumption, the meanings they carried beyond mere nutrition. One particularly intriguing discovery will be bread stamped with words or symbols before baking. Some loaves bore the baker's name or mark, a form of advertising or quality assurance. Others carried religious inscriptions, offerings to specific deities, prayers for health or protection. These stamped loaves speak to bread's dual nature as both commodity and sacred object, both daily necessity and spiritual symbol. Your thoughts turn occasionally to death, as they must for anyone living in a world where mortality is ever present. You have no family to perform funeral rites for you, no descendants to maintain your tomb, no wealth to purchase elaborate ceremonies. When you die, and you will die, perhaps sooner than you would wish given the toll your work takes on your body, what will become of you? The poorest Romans, those without resources or family, are disposed of with brutal efficiency. Their corpses are removed by contracted undertakers and buried in common pits outside the city walls, with no markers, no rituals, no remembrance. This fate awaits many who live as you do, on the margins of subsistence, lacking the social networks that provide proper burial. You have, however, made one provision against this undignified end. Several years ago, you joined a burial collegium, a guild of workers who pool resources to ensure members receive proper funerals. Each month, you contribute a small amount of money you can barely spare to the common fund. In return, when you die, the collegium will arrange for cremation, will provide an urn for your ashes, will conduct basic rituals, will place your remains in the guild's columbarium. It is not the elaborate funeral of the wealthy, with processions and professional mourners and grand monuments. But it is something. It means you will not be discarded like refuse, will not disappear without acknowledgement. The collegium members will gather, will speak your name, will place offerings including bread at your funeral. Your ashes will rest among those of other workers, other people who live modest lives of labor and struggle. The collegium meets monthly in a small rented room near your neighborhood. These gatherings serve multiple purposes: collecting dues, making decisions about the fund's management, but also providing rare moments of community. Members share simple meals, discuss shared concerns, honor deceased members with remembrance ceremonies. Bread features prominently in these gatherings. It is both the practical center of the meal and a symbol of shared existence, of the commonality that binds you to these other workers. The Roman religious calendar structures the year with festivals and observances that mark time's passage. As a baker, you are peripherally aware of these rhythms. They affect customer demand, create occasional holidays when even bakeries might reduce operations, provide structure to otherwise undifferentiated days. The Saturnalia in December brings a temporary inversion of social order, when masters might serve slaves and normal hierarchies relax. Bread consumption increases as families feast and exchange gifts. You bake extra loaves, knowing demand will rise. The Lupercalia in February involves rituals of purification and fertility. The Perilia in April celebrates Rome's founding. The Lemuria in May appeases restless spirits of the dead. Each of these occasions involves specific rituals, many of which include bread as offering or element of ceremonial meals. You do not participate actively in most of these festivals. Your social status and economic situation exclude you from many public ceremonies, but they structure your business nonetheless, creating predictable fluctuations in demand, marking the progression of seasons and years. What you cannot know, working in your bakery in the reign of Trajan, is how long the practices you follow will continue. The techniques of milling grain between stones, of leavening dough with sourdough culture, of baking in wood-fired ovens, these will persist for centuries, even millennia. Future bakers will perform essentially the same actions, following traditions that trace back through your time to civilizations that preceded Rome. But the religious dimensions will shift. New religions will emerge that use bread in different symbolic ways. The Christian faith, currently a minor and occasionally persecuted sect in Rome, will transform bread into the central symbol of their most sacred ritual. The simple act of breaking bread, already heavy with meaning in Roman culture, will take on new significance as representation of divine sacrifice and communion with the eternal. These changes lie in a future you will never see. In your present moment, bread remains what it has always been: sustenance, commodity, sacred substance, daily miracle. The fire in your oven connects to the eternal flame in Vesta's temple. The grain you grind was given by Ceres. The transformation you facilitate involves mysteries that transcend simple mechanical explanations. You are, whether you fully recognize it or not, performing sacred work. Your hands shape the substance that keeps Rome alive. Your fire transforms raw materials into the staff of life. Your labor, so ordinary in its daily execution, connects to forces and meanings that reach beyond the immediate concerns of profit and survival. As evening settles over the city and you bank your oven fire for the night, you preserve a small portion of flame to make tomorrow's work easier. This practical act echoes the Vestal Virgin's eternal vigil. The flame continues. The bread will be made again. The cycle persists, linking past to present to future in an unbroken chain of fire and grain and human labor. In the same city where you labor in your small bakery, breathing flour dust and tending your perpetual fire, there exists another world entirely. Let us drift now through that parallel Rome, observing how the wealthy experience bread and sustenance in ways that bear almost no resemblance to your daily reality. Rome's social hierarchy is written into its physical landscape. While you live and work in the Subura, with its narrow streets and towering tenement buildings, the wealthy occupy different spaces entirely. On the Palatine Hill, grand homes dome spread across generous plots of land. These residences feature interior courtyards, private gardens, elaborate decoration, and dedicated dining rooms designed specifically for entertaining guests. The physical distance between your bakery and these estates is perhaps only a mile or two, but the social distance is infinite. You have never entered such a house, will never be invited into one, can barely imagine what they contain. Your customers occasionally include slaves from wealthy households, sent to purchase bread for the servants' meals or for distribution to clients. These slaves pass through both worlds, the cramped commercial streets where you work and the spacious luxury of their masters' homes. but they speak little of what they observe. The wealthy rarely walk through the Subura. When they move through the city, they travel by litter, carried by slaves, insulated from the crowds and smells and noise of Rome's working districts. They have no reason to notice your bakery, no cause to consider where their bread originates. You exist, if you exist to them at all, only as an abstraction, one of the faceless multitudes who perform the city's necessary labor. The bread you bake is panis plebeius, common bread, made from wheat flour with perhaps some barley mixed in when costs require it. It is nourishing, filling, fundamentally adequate. But it is not what the wealthy eat. For Rome's elite, bread comes in varieties you never produce. Panis candidus, the whitest, most refined bread, is made from flour sifted multiple times to remove all bran and impurities. The result is a pale, fine-textured loaf that represents not just sustenance, but status. It demonstrates that the consumer can afford to waste much of the grain's nutrition in pursuit of appearance and delicacy. Some wealthy households employ their own bakers, slaves, trained specifically in the art of producing specialty breads. These bakers create loaves enhanced with milk instead of water, sweetened with honey, enriched with eggs and expensive olive oil. They bake bread studded with seeds, fennel, poppy, sesame, that you could never justify purchasing for your own products. They shape bread into elaborate forms, creating not just food but edible sculptures meant to impress dinner guests. The wealthy consume bread flavored with herbs, parsley, and its imported spices that cost more than you earn in a week. They eat bread so fresh, it's still warm from the oven, baked in small batches throughout the day to ensure constant perfection. The bread you sell might be several hours old by the time it's purchased, and your poorest customers buy day-old loaves at reduced prices. This difference in freshness alone marks the chasm between social classes. While you eat your simple meal of bread, oil, and salt, standing at your work table after a day's labor, Rome's elite are staging elaborate performances called banquets. These are not merely meals, but calculated displays of wealth, power, and social position. A Roman banquet begins in late afternoon and can extend for hours into the night. Guests recline on cushioned couches arranged around tables, their horizontal position both a comfort and a symbol of leisure. They do not sit upright as working people must. They lounge, their bodies announcing that they have no need to rush, no labor awaiting them, no pressing concerns beyond the pleasure of the moment. The food arrives in multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. First come the gustation's appetizers that might include oysters shipped alive from distant coastal waters, kept fresh in seawater, changed daily. Eggs prepared in various fashions. Delicate vegetables dressed with expensive imported garum. The fermented fish sauce that costs more than common workers earn in a month. Then the main courses furculae parade forth in succession. Whole roasted animals, their flesh seasoned with spice combinations you could not even name. Fish that were swimming in the Mediterranean yesterday, transported at great expense to arrive at the peak of freshness. Game meats venison, wild boar, rabbit, pheasant taken from private hunting reserves. Some hosts compete to serve increasingly exotic dishes, pushing past mere luxury into deliberate extravagance. Parrot tongue stew, requiring the slaughter of hundreds of birds to obtain enough of the delicacy. Dormice, specially fattened in terracotta jars, then stuffed and roasted. Flamingo tongues. Peacock brains. Foods chosen not for taste, but for rarity, for the sheer expense required to procure them, for the status they confer upon the host who can afford such waste. Wine flows throughout, not the cheap vinegary stuff available in neighborhood taverns, but aged vintages from famous regions, mixed with honey and spices to create mulsum. Servants continually refill cups, ensuring guests never experience even momentary thirst. These banquets serve purposes beyond mere eating. They are political tools, opportunities for the wealthy to display their resources and forge alliances. An invitation to a powerful senator's banquet carries meaning. It signals inclusion in an elite network, suggests favor and potential patronage. Conversely, the absence of an invitation communicates exclusion and social distance. Hosts use banquets to gauge rivals, to assess their guests' loyalty, to dispense favors and create obligations. The elaborate food is almost secondary to these social calculations. What matters is the demonstration of wealth sufficient to afford such expense, the taste refined enough to orchestrate the perfect progression of dishes, the power to command the labor of dozens of servants who make the spectacle possible. The cost of a single banquet might equal what you earn in months or even years of labor. Hosts think nothing of spending the equivalent of thousands of denarii on a single evening's entertainment. This expenditure represents a tiny fraction of their wealth, barely noticed in their accounting. For you, such an amount would be transformative enough to eliminate debt, to repair your oven, to purchase security against future misfortune. The Roman government has occasionally attempted to regulate this excess. Laws have been passed limiting expenditures on banquets, prohibiting certain rare delicacies, requiring dining rooms to have windows so inspectors can monitor compliance. But such laws are widely ignored among the truly wealthy, for whom the ability to flaunt regulations is itself a form of power demonstration. While guests recline and feast, an army of slaves orchestrates the banquet's execution. Cooks labor in kitchens heated to infernal temperatures, preparing dishes that require hours of exacting work. Servers move silently between couches, presenting dishes, pouring wine, clearing away finished courses. Musicians play in corners, providing entertainment. Sometimes dancers or acrobats perform. These slaves eat differently than their masters. After the banquet concludes and guests depart, servants consume what remains scraps from the elaborate dishes, simpler fare prepared specifically for them. Often they receive bread, much like what you produce, the common panis plebeius that suffices for those who work rather than recline. Some of these household slaves are sent to your bakery to purchase bread for the servants, daily meals, or for distribution to the master's clients' free citizens of lower status who receive gifts of food and money in nasi, exchange for political support and social deference. You serve them with the same efficiency you show all customers. The bronze coins they place in your palm are indistinguishable from those paid by any other buyer. These slaves occupy an ambiguous position in Rome's social hierarchy. They have no freedom, no legal personhood, no control over their own lives. Yet they live in grand houses, eat food superior to what many free workers can afford, witness luxury that most Romans never see. Their proximity to wealth does not make them wealthy, but it exposes them to a world completely foreign to your experience. Where your day begins before dawn and consists of unrelenting physical labor, the wealthy follow entirely different patterns. They rise late, having no need to catch optimal working hours. A light breakfast, perhaps bread, honey, fruit, cheese, wine is consumed at leisure. Nothing is urgent. Nothing demands immediate attention. The morning might be spent on social calls, conducting political business at the forum, overseeing estates and commercial ventures through intermediaries. Physical labor is entirely absent. Even mild exertion is considered degrading, appropriate only for slaves and the lower classes. Midday brings a light lunch, again consumed without haste. The afternoon is devoted to leisure visiting the public baths, exercising in private gymnasiums, reading in well-appointed libraries, discussing philosophy or literature with peers. The concept of leisure as a moral good, as the proper use of time for those with refined minds, is central to elite Roman identity. The main meal dinner occupies the evening, stretching for hours. This is when the banquets occur, when social bonds are reinforced, when the performance of status takes its primary form. Food is abundant, varied, elaborately prepared. The contrast with your bread, oil, salt dinner, consumed standing in your bakery after 14 hours of labor, could not be more stark. The Roman elite have constructed elaborate philosophical frameworks to justify this inequality. They argue that different people are naturally suited to different roles in society. The wealthy possess virtue, refinement, intellectual capacity that fit them for leadership and leisure. The working poor people like yourself are suited to labor by nature, lacking the qualities necessary for higher pursuits. According to this worldview, you bake bread because that is your proper function, determined by birth, ability, and divine ordering. The wealthy recline at banquets because they are meant to govern, to think, to represent civilization's highest achievements. The social order is not arbitrary or unjust. It reflects natural hierarchy. You have no education in philosophy, no time for abstract contemplation, but you sense the falseness in these justifications. You understand that chance and circumstance shape lives as much as any inherent quality. You were enslaved as a child, not because of natural inferiority, but because of misfortune, your family's poverty, your region's military defeat, the simple bad luck of being in the wrong place when slavers came through. Yet what good does this understanding bring? The structure of Roman society is immovable, ancient, reinforced by law and custom and military might. Your awareness of its injustice changes nothing. You must still rise before dawn, still labor, still accept the narrow confines of your existence. Very rarely you catch glimpses of this other world. A wealthy household might order bread for a large gathering dozens of loaves for distribution to clients or servants. The slave who places the order might mention the occasion, letting slip details of the preparations underway. You learn that in those grand houses, food spoils because too much was prepared, that entire dishes go uneaten, given to servants or discarded. That waste occurs on a scale you can barely comprehend. Once, years ago, you witnessed a procession through the Subura, some wealthy family, moving from one residence to another, their furniture and possessions carried by dozens of slaves. You saw carved wooden furniture inlaid with ivory, bronze vessels polished to mirror brightness, fabrics dyed in colors so rich and pure you had never imagined such shades existed. The contrast with your own sparse room, with its rough chest and single woolen blanket, was overwhelming. These glimpses disturb your mental equilibrium. They force recognition of just how constrained your life is, how little you possess, how far you exist from comfort or security. For days afterward, you find yourself troubled by thoughts you normally suppress. But eventually, the immediate demands of survival reassert themselves. There is grain to grind, dough to knead, bread to bake. You cannot afford the luxury of dwelling on what you lack. Yet for all the vast differences in daily experience, you and the wealthy share one absolute commonality: mortality. The elaborate banquets, the refined bread, the expensive imported delicacies, none of these prevent death. Disease takes the wealthy as it takes the poor, though perhaps slightly less frequently, given their better nutrition and living conditions. Age diminishes elite bodies as it diminishes yours, though perhaps more slowly given their freedom from hard labor. The wealthy build elaborate tombs, monuments designed to preserve their names for posterity. They commission sculptures, inscriptions, marble memorials that will outlast their flesh by centuries. You will have only a niche in the burial collegium's columbarium, a small space among many, your name perhaps recorded on a simple plaque. But in the ultimate analysis, both outcomes are the same. The flesh fails, consciousness ceases, the individual disappears into the undifferentiated past. The wealthy man's elaborate tomb and your modest niche serve the same function. They mark absence, memorialize what is gone. The bread they ate, refined and white and expensive, nourished them no better than your coarse loaves nourish you. All of it becomes eventually dust. The twilight moment. As the day ends and you prepare for sleep, you sometimes allow yourself a moment of reflection. You think about the bread you've made simple, honest, nourishing. Your loaves feed workers, servants, common people who live lives of labor much like your own. They sustain the foundational reality of Rome, the daily survival of the multitudes who make the city function. The wealthy eat their refined bread, their exotic meats, their elaborate desserts. But fundamentally, they eat for the same reason you do, to continue living, to fuel their bodies through another day. The vast difference in what they consume and what you consume obscures this basic similarity. Strip away the social performance, the status signaling, the deliberate extravagance, and eating remains simply eating. Survival remains simply survival. You do not envy the wealthy. Exactly. Envy requires hope that you might obtain what they possess, and you harbor no such illusions. Your station is fixed, unchangeable. But you sometimes wonder what it would feel like to recline on a cushioned couch, to eat food prepared by others, to live without the constant anxiety about rent and grain costs, and whether tomorrow's earnings will suffice. These thoughts lead nowhere productive. You set them aside as you set aside the day's aches and concerns. Sleep waits, offering its temporary escape from both labor and contemplation. Tomorrow, you will rise before dawn. You will grind grain, knead dough, tend your fire, bake bread. The cycle continues regardless of what the wealthy do in their distant, separate world. The city contains multitudes living vastly different existences, all of them somehow contributing to Rome's continuation. You are one small part of an enormous system, playing your role, sustaining your portion of the whole. The bread you make is honest work, necessary work. It may be simple, but it is real in ways that the elaborate performances of the wealthy perhaps are not. Let this thought bring you comfort as you settle into sleep. You have labored, you have produced something essential, you have survived another day. In the morning, the work will resume. But for now, rest. Let your tired body find what peace it can. The flour dust, the oven's heat, the turning millstone, all of it fades as consciousness dims. Sleep takes you gently into its embrace, granting respite from a world divided between those who labor and those who recline, between those who bake and those who feast. And so we return, slowly, gently, across the span of 2,000 years. The narrow streets of the Subura fade into memory. The sound of the millstone grinding grain diminishes to silence. The heat from the baker's oven cools to nothing. That world so vivid in its details, so consuming in its daily struggles, recedes into the distance from which we summoned it. You lie now in your own bed, in your own time, separated from that Roman baker by an expanse of centuries that renders his concerns and anxieties safely remote. The rent he worried about paying, the grain costs that threatened his precarious stability, the physical deterioration his labor caused, all of it resolved long ago in ways he could never know. His story ended, as all stories end, in the simple cessation of life. Perhaps he lived another 10 years after the day we observed. Perhaps 20. Eventually, his hands failed him, or his lungs gave out, or some illness claimed him. The bakery passed to another owner, or closed entirely, or burned in one of Rome's frequent fires. The city he knew continued without him, as cities do. The empire persisted, expanded, eventually contracted. Centuries later, the structures of Roman power collapsed, scattered, transformed into something new. The Subura's narrow streets were built over, buried, excavated by archaeologists who would piece together fragments of daily life from broken pottery and carbonized bread. That preserved bread, the loaves found in Pompeii's buried bakeries, serves now as a bridge between past and present. Modern people can look at these ancient loaves and recognize something fundamental. Bread then was bread, as bread now is bread. The basic transformation of grain into sustenance transcends time, connecting human experiences across the millennia. Yet for all the continuity, consider how different your world is from the baker's. You rest now in comfort he could never have imagined. A mattress beneath you, the temperature-controlled air around you, the security of knowing that tomorrow's food is assured. These represent luxuries beyond his comprehension. You do not rise before dawn to labor for 14 hours at physically destructive work. You do not breathe flour dust that damages your lungs. You do not count bronze coins with anxiety, knowing that a single day's illness could cascade into catastrophe. The struggles that consumed his entire existence acquiring food, maintaining shelter, surviving from one day to the next occupy perhaps a small fraction of your concerns. What seemed to him permanent and unchangeable conditions of human life have been, in your world, transformed or eliminated entirely. The vast inequality between his experience and that of Rome's elite has shifted, moderated, reconfigured into different patterns. This is not to say suffering and struggle have vanished from the world. They persist in new forms, affecting different people in different ways. But the specific grinding poverty of the Roman working poor, the absolute precariousness of their existence, the lack of any safety net or hope for improvement, these particular conditions have, in much of the world, diminished. As you settle more deeply into rest, let this recognition bring some measure of peace. The hardships of the past were real, were brutal, were endured by countless individuals whose names are lost to history. That baker in the Subura, the one whose day we observe so closely, was one among millions who lived lives of quiet desperation, who labored without recognition, who survived as best they could within systems they could not change. Their struggles matter, even across the centuries. They deserve to be remembered, not with pity exactly, but with acknowledgement. These were people fundamentally like yourself, caught in circumstances that constrained their possibilities, limited their choices, demanded everything they had simply to persist. The bread they made was real. The fire they tended was real. The aching muscles and worried thoughts and brief moments of rest were real. All of it happened in the same world you now inhabit, on the same ground where cities still stand, under the same stars that still wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Let the distance comfort you. You are here now, safe in your bed, free to sleep without concern for tomorrow's oven, tomorrow's grain costs, tomorrow's customers. The past cannot touch you except through imagination, and imagination can be set aside as easily as it was summoned. Your breathing is slowed. Your body has relaxed into the mattress. The details of the baker's life, so vivid moments ago, are already becoming dreamlike, fragments floating in the space between waking and sleep. The millstone turns slower now, its grinding sound fading. The oven's heat dissipates. The narrow room above the bakery empties. Somewhere in the night, in the quiet darkness of your mind, a fire is being banked. Coals are preserved against morning's need. The cycle pauses, suspended, waiting for dawn that may or may not come. But for now, there is only rest. Only the gentle descent into unconsciousness. Only the soft, forgiving darkness that asks nothing of you. The bread has been baked. The day has ended. The work is done. Let yourself drift now, without resistance, without thought. The past releases you. The present makes no demands. There is only this moment, this breath, this gradual dissolution of awareness into sleep's embrace. The baker sleeps too, in his rough bed above the bakery, his body claiming the few hours of rest it will be granted. Across the city, fires burn low in thousands of ovens. Across the centuries, the connection fades. Everything becomes quiet, still, peaceful. Sleep now. The story is complete. There is nothing more you need to know, nothing you must remember. Simply rest, letting everything fall away, the names, the dates, the details, all of it dissolving like morning mist in sunlight. In the silence, only breathing remains. In the darkness, only rest. The ancient world and the modern world both fade into the same gentle nothing. All times become one time. All places become no place. And in this timeless, placeless space, you find what the baker found in those brief hours between labor and labor symbol. Necessary, healing sleep. Rest well.